Good morning. I'm Mayor Buddy Dyer, and I'd like to welcome you to the July 13th, 2015 workshop of the Orlando City Council. Commissioners, this morning we have our annual budget workshop as we approach fiscal year 15-16, and I would like to thank you for your leadership over the past several years as we have come out of the recession stronger than just about any city in the country. We led the entire country in job growth last year, and we're second in overall growth. And we had to make some tough budget decisions during the course of those years, but I think we made those decisions and positioned ourselves in a very good place. So state mandated property tax reforms have also had an effect, and last year we raised our millage rate. I don't foresee us having to do that anytime in the future, but it was a tough decision that we made and have put us in great financial footing. We're probably in the best financial position of any major city in the state of Florida, and that's reflected by our bond ratings, which are some of the very highest in the entire state. So at this point, I would like to call on Bryan Battles, our Deputy CFO, for the budget workshop. How about, well, my notes said Bryan, Rebecca, so I'll call on Rebecca Sutton, our CFO, to introduce Bryan.
Yes, I'll introduce Bryan, but I also want to just issue my personal thanks to our budget team, including Bryan. As some of you know, in the last 6 months or so, we have promoted both Bryan Battles and Chris McCullion. Guys, can y'all stand? These are really, really smart people. I thank these guys every day for all of the support and all of the really creative knowledge that they have. So, you know, we're extraordinarily lucky to have young people of this nature and of this quality working for our organization as well as the citizens of our city. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bryan.
Rebecca, I know that pretty much everybody from your floor is down here now, so how about if we, either you or Bryan, go ahead and introduce and tell the commission and the public what their functions are.
Okay. Bryan especially wanted to do that today, so I'm just going to turn the mic over to him, and He's going to take it away.
Morning, Mayor and Commissioners. So with us here today, we have the budget team. I don't want to hold back on the amount of support that we get from the departments as well. I know I'm going to recognize my team, but this is all a joint effort here at the city. The departments are very involved in prioritizing and setting some of the tones for the budget, and you know, we're taking it over from there and going through some of the numbers. So with us today, if you could just stand as I call your name. So we have Martin Carmody, the budget division manager. We have Brendan Gibson, who handles Families, Parks and Rec and Orlando venues. Taisha Resnick with Fire Department and Housing. Ashley Connolly with Public Works and Economic Development. And Eric Hutcherson with Police. And then recently we had a new addition with Jason Vojkovic, who will be getting a department shortly as we shift up there. So we wanted to thank you, and I think they all know the support that you've given us as well with the department, so thank you again. And Rebecca, I appreciate you setting the tone for the expectations of how this presentation is supposed to go with the applause, the praise that you gave us, so hopefully I can live up to those standards. So today we're here to talk about the fiscal year 15-16 budget. It's going to be kind of a high level of some of our budget picture of where we're at in this time. I will say that these numbers do have the tendency and potentially could change a little bit as we fine-tune the edges, but this is a pretty good budget to start off at this point in time. And again, everything gets finalized when we have our 2 public hearings in September. So today, the agenda that we're going to walk through is quickly just kind of having a historical perspective of how we got to this point. The mayor in his comments already laid out some of those topics. Then talk about some of the high level, again, budget summary for the entire budget, some of the points of interest that I wanted to note for you all today in the public. Get into general funds, revenues, expenditures in the departments, all the funds, revenues, expenditures, departments, and then obviously our next steps with where we proceed from here. First, I wanted to have this slide because, as we all know, the city values financial responsibility, and I wanted to reinforce that this budget reflects that idea so much that it's in our city mission. Some of the history, as we talked about in the past, from 2009 through the current year, cumulatively, we've saved the city about $230 million for the cuts that we've taken over those time periods. There are some additional reductions in this current budget that I'll get to in a little bit, but this kind of set the tone for developing and starting this budget process. On the staffing side, as the population grew, we continue to reduce staff and become more efficient and really focus on reorganizing our workforce to get the most out of our individuals and also still deliver the service levels that are required. During that same time period, we added over 100 public safety sworn employees as well. And again, the rating agencies are recognizing us, continue to recognize us for our strong financial management. As you see, AAA rating from Fitch, and we actually got a upgrade from S&P after we made the decisions that we made last year. So I think that is something to note as well. This budget contains the property tax revenues are finally returned to the pre-recession levels. It does recognize revenue from some increased economic activity. We're still continuing to focus on those high levels of service, but this budget does include some additional investments in infrastructure and facility maintenance. And then we have some modest increases in staffing, mainly where economic conditions demand, such as engineering survey, traffic management. We have been able to address some of our more immediate needs during the current year through the budget review committee process that comes to City Council for approval, and there's actually some of those staff members on this afternoon's agenda. At the end of all this general fund still has 2 fewer positions than it had previously. We're again including our full actuarial required contributions to all 3 pension funds and our retiree health care. We're continuing to be one of the few, if the only one, that is fully funding our OPEB obligations, and this budget continues that trend. This budget does increase and return our capital improvement program to pre-recession levels. As you recall, back in the 08-09 timeframe, we cut that number from the general fund down to about half. This is getting those numbers back to where they were. We also have some increased contingency levels, and again, this budget doesn't include any prior year unspent revenues or reserves. The general fund revenues that we talk about, and I'll get into some more detail about each one of these in the following slides. But as you can see, most of our revenues are all trending in the right direction. The exception being the utility service tax, essentially the communications services tax side of that equation. Charges for services are going up through our cost allocation plan as well as our enterprise dividends. And then we're seeing some reductions in our transfers, and mainly just from an accounting standpoint of how we move between our various funds. So property tax, one of the largest of our general fund revenues. In 2015, the taxable base for the city rose about 14%. That's almost $3 billion of additional valuation. New net taxable or new construction was over $1 billion. And the amount of exempt value increased by almost 5%. So with this budget, as the mayor pointed out, we are proposing to maintain, or this budget proposes to maintain, a 6.65 tax rate. But I do want to bring note to the fact that without that adjusted millage from last year, the revenue would still be below peak years, almost about $13 million below. So even though we're past the peak year from a revenue standpoint, if we wouldn't have made those decisions, we would still be below those levels. And again, as I pointed out, the CST, the communication service tax, is kind of what's driving this. It's averaged a decrease anywhere in the neighborhood of $1.3 million or so in the last couple of years, with some swings anywhere from $900,000 down to $2.3 million down. So we wanted to make sure we're continuing that downward trend and not over projecting and staying conservative with our revenues. Sales tax, I wanted to point out that when we developed this budget and what we've talked about, it was before the State Department of Revenue Office of Tax Research estimates came out. They were delayed because of a special session. Usually they come out in the May, June timeframe. We actually just received those, or they just got put out last week. So the sales tax came out last Wednesday. Its number is a little bit higher than ours, almost about $2 million, but it seems pretty aggressive. So right now that may be one of the ones that we're going to continue to look at and look at how we're actually receiving those revenues and see if it makes sense, or if we're comfortable with our estimate, which is still about $1 million more than what it was last year. Municipal revenue sharing, again, is part of one of those state estimates, came out last week. This number is much closer to our estimate, and we're seeing the increase there. Local business tax, we pretty much are hovering right around that $8 million mark, but we are seeing some increases, and we expect that trend to continue. So we've proposed to up our numbers to go in line with those trends. And then again, a few years ago, OUC kind of set a plan of a few years of how their dividend/franchise fees arrangement with the city would increase over time. This year, we're seeing the second year of that, and it's a roughly $3 million increase. So those are kind of the main items to note on the revenue side. Again, on the general fund expenditure side, or the summary of these are kind of some of the main things that have been included in this budget. Again, we have our third year, essentially, of our negotiated cost of living adjustments and public safety steps. It's about $3 million. Our pension, retiree, health care contributions increased about 1.3. We did have some health insurance increases, but it's very nominal at $900,000 when you're talking about our health care size. Increased transfer of capital. This gets back to what I was talking about on the kind of the pre-recession levels. We're increasing the general fund transfer of almost $6 million to the capital improvement program. We did increase our contingency level. The regular kind of contingency that we've been holding has been roughly about $1 million. We're getting that up to $4 million in case, and really lets us have some ability to take care of anything that may come up over the fiscal year. There are some departmental initiatives that are still being finalized, but the idea of these would be to improve efficiency, as well as focus on the citizens. Some of this could have been some of the items that over the last few years were cut, and we've heard some wanting to put additional emphasis on those. So we did include some budget here. I think we'll be talking about those further as we go, because like I said, those are still being finalized. We do have an increased maintenance program of about almost $1 million. This would be within the actual department budgets. So Families, Parks and Rec, Police, Fire will get a little bit of additional money to deal with their facilities, working with our facilities division. And then we talked about in the previous cuts over those years, we had that across the board cut, or the attrition allowance. Last year, or in the current year we're in, was $15 million. We're still proposing to keep that, but we're keeping it at a reduced level of $10 million. We think that level will still have the departments be able to manage and as well make sure that they're making those decisions to deliver the services, but at the same time maintain the staffing, the levels that they need to make. Kind of high level at the department, again with the general fund side of this equation, you'll see most of them have modest increases, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5%. Most of these increases are directly attributable to that essentially $5 million across the board reduction from the 15 to 10. There's a couple other things that play into it from OPD and fire. We're changing how we account for off-duty pay with getting a revenue and an expense. So it really has, the net effect is zero, but you'll see the expense budgets go up a little bit in those. But again, we're at the over $400 million general fund budget, broken up by departments in this way. Like to always show that graphically, because as you can see, police and fire still make up almost, almost 2/3 of our budget. We're continuing that emphasis on public safety, and the numbers are still representing that. Getting into the other fund side of the equation, again, talking about revenues, then expenses, then some of the departments. Two of the revenue summary items that we wanted to note is we are waiving the essentially automatic inflationary increases for wastewater and solid waste, 5% for wastewater, 4% for solid waste. They too have an increase. The other funds too have an increase into the capital project side of the equation. Specifically, wastewater has a significant contribution to wastewater construction activities. And then just in general, since the internal service funds are essentially billing the other funds, when the expenses go up in all of those, their revenues go up for those internal service funds. All revenues tells much of the same story that the general fund side did. As you can see, charges for services and transfers in play a little bit bigger role in the all funds, mainly when you start throwing the enterprise activities as well as our internal service funds, and the charges for services play a larger piece of the pie. And when you talk about our ancillary or our construction type funds, usually they're getting transfers in from the operational side of the equation, which is why that one plays in. Again, graphically, like I said, charges for services play a bigger piece in this pie. On the expenditure side for other funds, you're seeing a lot of the same things that we've put an emphasis on for the general fund. Again, salaries and benefits are that last year of our negotiated cost of living. Again, increased capital investments, wastewater. We're maintaining our street or pavement rehab numbers, and then the general fund contribution to the capital improvement fund would be included here. Our building code enforcement fund, we are seeing an increase there, mainly for the staff and the equipment and the other ancillary costs that go along with an increased operation because of the emphasis and also the levels of economic activity that we're experiencing. Again, even when you put into all funds into picture, the non-departmental is kind of one of the bigger ones that you're seeing, and that's the capital improvement program as well as our increased contingency. Public Works, when you factor in wastewater's contribution to its capital program, you're seeing the increase there. I do want to note that the fire decrease is really an accounting situation with our EMS fund. Historically, we billed Medicaid and Medicare revenue on what they were billed, not what we thought we were going to collect, even though we would never actually collect it from those sources. So this is adjusting the revenue and adjusting the expenses to be more in line with that operation, which is the decrease. So there's not a true decrease to that department. So I do want to note that. And graphically, by department, the total budgets for all funds. This year, at this point in time, we are proposing a balanced budget. As I said, there still could be some minor changes there, but at this point in time, we're able to match our revenues to our expenses in both the general fund and in all funds to bring to you a full balanced budget. So now I have just some next steps. Again, I want to talk about, we start this process kind of in the November, December timeframe, kind of planning it in our office, and then the departments get involved in that January through April timeframe. There's a lot of conversations that go back and forth and kind of understanding the operations, what needs to happen, what changes. Again, April through about now, we're fine-tuning that. These numbers, and our staff in the Office of Management and Budget are reviewing those. This past week, I had the opportunity for commissioner briefings. Today we're having our budget workshop, and the next couple of meetings are our statutory requirement. So on July 27th, we'll have the mayor's budget address, and we'll have to vote on the tentative ad valorem or property tax rate, and then our 2 required public hearings in September. And with that was again a kind of a high level of where this budget is laid out at this point in time. Again, a balanced budget, an emphasis on capital and the department's resources accordingly. So I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Bryan. So a couple things I'd emphasize. Number one are, if you go back to slide on page 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a row where we made significant cuts to our city budget, and those were tough decisions on service points, and I think we were able to focus and identify the core functions of the city government, and we were able to keep those core functions at a very high level for our residents. And then the second thing I'd note, it's a little nicer coming into a budget session where we're not confronted with a huge budget gap starting out, so a little easier budget season this year than we've had over the course of probably the last 4. So Commissioner Stewart and then Commissioner Ings.
Great. Thank you very much, Bryan. Thank you, and thank you to the work all of y'all have done. It is every year it's yeoman's work, and I'm deeply grateful. I've got several questions. I think you covered some as I was going through. So if you did, then let me kind of sneak through it a little bit. Over on page 9, we talked about the utilities and communications tax going down $1.7 million. Is that a result of the last legislative cuts?
No, I think that's more of a result of the types of services that people are utilizing.
All right. Less home phones?
That
kind of thing?
That kind of thing.
As opposed to, because there were some cuts in some of the utility taxes, are these some limitations?
The CST was one of those that was cut, but it was the state side of the equation, not the city side.
Okay, all right, good. Other revenue down there, I know in the past we've had some detail of that. I'd like to kind of see where that other revenue.
I think the biggest component of that, especially even that increase, is related to the off-duty. So the off-duty now will show as another.
It shows up internally and not externally? Okay. That's good.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
For the sake, I think, of the community, over on page 18, you show Orlando venues as no proposed budget and no change. I think probably for the sake of the community, that's because that's a enterprise fund, external, made up by the revenue that is generated by the venues. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the idea it doesn't show because.
So it would show, the Orlando venues would show in that other funds area.
Right, in the other
to see
fund
their
area,
operation.
and here it would show as not part of our general fund or general fund expenditures, which is another way of saying we're not taking any general fund money and spending it into Orlando venues. That's the key.
What's that? Yeah, I will say, just to make sure that we're clear, there is a small component in the non-departmental area that is general fund support for the Orlando venues
Yeah.
activity related to some of the waivers and holding the community events that we have at those facilities. But it doesn't show as a department expense. It's more of a
Right,
transfer,
right.
which shows in non-departmental.
The key is just that the community needs to understand that is an enterprise fund and it's operating on its own, and that was the goal originally when we started that project. Over on page 21, the gas tax distribution, I know it's a slight increase. Have any long-term projection about gas tax and what it really means to us in terms of, I mean, we're at a limitation that we have X amount of cents per gallon. So if we sell $4 a gallon, we get the same cents. We don't get a percent of that. Have we done any long-term projections based upon that, or is that really just a good estimate? I mean, I would see it either leveling off or going down, is what I would see.
I think to answer your question, Commissioner, we have done some projections, but we've been pretty stable right around that 8 million
Yeah.
all through this, up and down, 8.4, 7.6. I mean, it usually stays pretty close to that 8 million mark. So here we figured since we were pretty close to a round number, we were going to go with it.
Yeah, I would imagine it's leveling off and will slightly go down, and it's not going to be a significant part of our budget because of that reason. All right, a couple other quick questions, but the biggest one let me kind of touch on is that last year we did a great job getting all the information online and getting it out online. Today, when we look online, it's last year's budget and last year's information. So the question is how quickly are we going to be able to get this information online and get it prepared?
So
by the next
we have
meeting?
the presentation ready, and sometime during the course of this week, we'll be delivering to your offices, as well as putting online a budget and brief, which is similar to kind of a little bit more in depth of these numbers, as well as our commissioner notebooks, which gets into the cost centers and the expense categories a little bit deeper per department, per area, and we'll deliver a hard copy of that to the clerk's office as well.
The message I'm concerned about is that tomorrow morning there will be an article in the paper, and then tonight there'll be some stuff about our city budget.
And people will go.
And then
Yes,
people
sir.
will go to the city budget online and see information that's a year old. So the implication to people who will see it is that we're going to raise our millage, which is in fact exactly not correct. So maybe something immediately that says this is old budget information and new information will be posted into the week or something. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't end up having to deflect.
Yep, I just confirmed the budget and brief can go on as soon as I get back to my office.
Okay,
So we'll get something up there.
perfect. Because that's an important thing for communication out into the community. Thank you for your work. I've got a couple of those small questions I won't bore you with right now, but thank you for your work, and I appreciate your work.
Again, we're always here to help, so let us know.
Commissioner Ings?
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
And you made it look so easy. Nothing to sweat about, as you spoke of, Mayor, about a gap, and how we feel this gap and everything. So who was it really behind this? Was it you or Chris?
I think it was you guys and ladies. I think the decisions that we made, we've alluded to many times. I think it finally got us to a place where we're preparing a budget that, again, is balanced. We're getting back to kind of our pre-2009, pre-recession levels. the conversation, I think, should be, we're trying to normalize, but at the same time. So I will say that all of the decisions that you've made have helped. But again, the departments are still taking, an across the board attrition that they're having to live within. So we're still making sure that we're doing what we need to be fiscally responsible.
Does this budget include any raises for the employees? Is that a part of this as well?
Correct. So this would have the last year, so the 2% increase the last year of all the negotiated.
And if you would, explain the waiving of the inflationary fee increase of the 5% and 4% for wastewater and solid waste. Would you explain that a little bit further, what that really means?
So a few years ago, we kind of tried to stabilize the rates, and that we did some projections. And at that point in time, we set into, I believe, city code, some automatic inflationary rate increases to maintain that operation and to keep delivering the service levels. At this point in time, we think both of those funds, solid waste and wastewater, are at a point where we can not have that automatic increase. And it takes a resolution or some action by city council that will be wrapped into our budget conversation to waive those. In terms of what it actually means, it's probably in the neighborhood of $30, $40. It's all based on usage annually for an average family, what they would save on their utility bill.
Okay, so this is a savings for the public or
That
for
would
the
be correct.
residents? Okay. And then I guess the last thing that I'm interested in is the transfers in. There's a decrease of 2.1, and I wanted to know if you can explain what are the transfers in and what does this mean?
So I think the decrease that you're seeing here is mainly because of the last year to help our school resource officer program and to help our budget process in general. We had a transfer of roughly $2.5 million from the contraband fund, and this does not include that again. So this now that program is being picked up by the general fund.
Okay.
So that would be a reduction from that outside fund transferring money in.
Okay, thank you, and you guys did a great job on your presentation today. And like I said earlier, man, you make it seem so easy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheehan and then Commissioner Hill.
Well, I know there's nothing easy about this, so thank you. Just because they look good now, they probably had a good sleep over the weekend for a change instead of having to come with the horrible news like they've had to. And again, I'd just like to say that last year we were faced with $30 million in shortfall. We were not in the situation that we're in right now. We made $13 million in cuts, and we still had a $17 million gap. That's why we had to do the millage increase. We don't like to do millage increases. It's at this board. I can look around. Does anybody like to raise taxes? I know none of us like to do that. So again, it was a very difficult situation, but it stopped the hemorrhage. Again, if you have a $30 million budget shortfall, it was a perfect storm of property values decreasing and those caps on commercial and homeowners went down at the same time. All those caps went. And again, I tell people, a 3% cap on homes does not impact us that much, because the bottom line is people may call the police once or maybe twice a year. A commercial property may call the police 200 times a year. So there's a big difference in the amount of services that are being consumed by commercial properties as opposed to homeowners. And so guess who had to take on that entire responsibility when 54% of your budget is police and fire? We had to raise it on everyone. So again, be careful what you vote for, be careful what you ask for, you may just get it. And it put us in an untenable situation. I have been saying, don't vote for this tax cut on commercial property because they're the ones that are consuming the services. And that's where we ended up where we're at. And again, I'll be off my soapbox for that. But again, we have to balance our budget. I think that's a good thing at the city level. I think it's appropriate that we balance our budget. We don't have budget deficits like the federal government. We have to do what we have to do, and we have to make decisions sometimes that aren't very easy. So again, that 17% increase, I think, stopped the hemorrhage, and now the patient's stable, and now we can go on living. So, again, thank you for all your hard work. I know this has not been easy. We've still got some revenues that are decreasing, but as the economy grows, hopefully we'll do better. But again, even though things are coming on the tax rolls now, they're going to get that 10% cap. So we're going to be dealing with this year to year, and it's all going to be based on growth. So if we don't have that growth, we're not going to have that extra income because, again, we're only going to be able to recover so much a year. I keep trying to explain this to folks, and they don't understand it. And again, the average homeowner is paying about $40 a month. I'd like to, if we can show that about what that average is, because people are paying $200 a month for cable, and they're like, "We'll pay that," and then, but they don't understand the level of service that they're getting, I think, for a very good, amount of money. So again, I think that's important to point out what the actual cost of this is, and what, again, what the average costs are and things like that. And the people need to look at what they're paying for the city taxes, and so I think those are very, very important things to communicate to people. So thank you, Bryan.
Thank you. Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, sir. I remember sitting here a year ago and, man, this being my first vote in that chapter. Because it was a hard vote. It was a hard vote. It was my first vote, and I had to make a tough decision, and I had to vote yes for the millage increase. And now looking back a year, it was the right vote. We're not here cutting programs, which we would have had to, and programs is big, and would have had to cut jobs, and here we are now able to create more programs throughout the city in different departments. We're able to hire new employees. We're able to increase salaries and wages. We're in a good place. The budget is balanced. I'd like to thank the team for all your diligence, your hard work daily. I mean, numbers is something that is not easy. We can sit here and pass legislation, but when you start trying to put those numbers together to make the city run, you're really the heart of the city. So we thank you, and I applaud the auxiliary departments, Chief Mina, Lisa Early and their staff, Chief Williams and Chief Miller. We can't forget him. He was here during that season. And all the employees for coming together, making it work so that now we're somewhere where we can continue to grow the city. But in layman's terms, I like to put that when Commissioner Sheehan just took some of that medical terminology, and when we're at the bedside, I like to break things down in layman terms. Could we, because when you gave me that briefing, it was powerful, those numbers. Can you, in layman terms, tell our constituents that might be listening, or as Commissioner Stewart says, that might go to print, how much, because of this increase, how much money was made? And you've already showed us how you distribute it and what that net is at the end, because I thought that was pretty powerful.
So last year, before the increase, we were about 110, and we ended about 130. Again, I'm approximating here. This year, without it, we would have been at 125, and we're at the 146, 147. So, I mean, we're looking at $20 million or so that the millage change had made. But again, I want to emphasize that with that change, we still would have been below those numbers from our peak years.
You good, Commissioner Hill?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Gray?
Thank you, sir. And Bryan, thanks to you and your team for your efforts. On page 10, could you just point of clarification, the first bullet point, you talked about the increase of 14%. Help me again. I think you explained it, but I missed it. What portion was from the additional increase in value / millage versus just actual new growth?
So the total taxable rose about $3 billion or so, and the new construction was $1 billion in
Okay.
big round numbers.
Thank you. And then on page, page 18, don't need to do it now, but I'd love to get with, the big ticket there, fire and police, just to get a little more color on those increases. And then non-departmental, it's such a big number. Does it make sense to put a little more definition to that category?
We can provide that for you, Commissioner.
Thank you. That's all I had, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Ortiz, you want a shot, or are you good?
No, I'll be the quiet one today.
Okay. Just to follow up on one thing that Commissioner Stewart asked about, and that's the gas tax. So the gas tax is set by the county, and every county is eligible for 12 cents. And then there's a formula that distributes the revenue between the county and the various cities. And our county is at 6 cents, so we only utilize half of gas tax. Or Osceola County just went to the full 12 cents. And most of the other counties, I think, around us have a higher gas tax than we do. Seminole might be roughly equivalent, I can't remember for sure, but it could increase.
Yeah.
If it stays at 6 cents, it probably will diminish over a period of time, because it doesn't matter really what the price of gas is. It could be $1 or it could be $5, and it's still the same 6 cents. So if the county were to take the initiative, they could increase the gas tax.
We've said this over and over again, but it's counterproductive in that when we want people to save gas, but the gas prices go down, then they use more gasoline. We get more money when they are not as effective in terms of saving gas by going to hybrid vehicles. That's the challenge, is as we move forward with a fixed amount, no matter what you have, it's just, you don't get more. That percentage now is a different story, but percentage is a little bit harder to predict. But it just seems that how we've done it is counterproductive to the long-term sustainability of trying to become less dependent on foreign gasoline. And that's so it's hard to explain, because it's when you run over all the numbers, we all talk about percentages, then all of a sudden you stop and go, not in gas tax, it's a cent. And they go, oh, so if it drops to $1.10 a gallon, we love it, because people drive their cars. But it's counterproductive to what we think long-term sustainability is. So, anyway,
Brian,
that's
thank
all.
you and all of your team. So get a little rest this evening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. All right, that concludes our workshop for today.